Hey, it's Jack from Jack Gately Real Estate and the Online Real Estate Academy. Today we have some questions. You have questions, I have answers. We have a number of questions for the Massachusetts real estate exam. So remember, the exam's in two parts, the national and the Massachusetts. These questions come from a student who had some questions about the Massachusetts portion of the exam. So let's get to it. If you're attempting to build a boathouse, these will not be exact questions from the exam, by the way. I think they're just basically to the best of his recollection from taking the exam yesterday. If you're attempting to build a boathouse next to a pond, what would be the steps and who would you need approval from? So I think in this particular case, what they're looking for, the answer here from a Massachusetts context, would be the Conservation Commission for your local city or town. The statute of frauds clearly states contracts need to be in writing, but do they need to be in writing to be legal or enforceable? So under the statute of frauds, it needs to be in, well, let me just answer this a different way, actually. You can have a verbal contract, which is legal. You can have a verbal contract, which is legal, but it's not enforceable. Only written contracts are enforceable. By the way, that kind of sounds like more like a national portion of the exam question. Turn that down for you. Sorry about that. Stigmatized Property Act. If you as a broker, or a salesperson for that matter, do not disclose something that may have happened in the house previously, is that a misrepresentation in any way? And so under the Stigmatized Property Act, or provision, you only have to answer questions relative to prior events if asked. So if there was a triple murder there or something awful like that, you don't have to disclose that unless they ask you, because it's not a material defect of the property, it's an event that happened. So it would not be a misrepresentation unless they asked you and then you lied about it, and then you're in deep trouble. A misrepresentation is when you withhold a known material defect. A misrepresentation is when you withhold a known material defect. Seller of a home can be liable under Chapter 93A. Something about a developer owning it less than a year, never living in there. Let me just be really precise. Chapter 93A, which is the Consumer Protection Act here in Massachusetts, prevents or discourages, I should say, deceptive business practice. So we do see this from time to time, especially in a foreclosed property. The bank might foreclose, and the bank, is back in, Peoria, Indiana, or something like that. They've never lived in the house. They don't know the property other than it's a line item on some spreadsheet. In that case, very often in those cases, you'll see actually in the listing, it will say owner has never occupied property or something like that. So in that case, they can't disclose something they don't know. And so it's only being a deceptive business practice, really, if they knew and then they did not disclose. If a broker incorporates a brokerage real estate firm, the corporation must be file with the board is the answer. Technically, it's called a real estate business license, and it goes for 2 years. You have to renew that every 2 years. I have quite a few spreadsheets, licenses, so I have a little spreadsheet that keeps track of them all, so don't miss anything. What things need to be filed specifically and consistently is the next question. I would say the most obvious one is your renewal for your salesperson or broker license. The first license that you get if you're a new agent will go to your third birthday. It'll be prorated to your third birthday. And then thereafter, it's every 2 years on your birthday. Don't understand that question. Something about a wind chime. Okay, here. Do you give the renter the interest on a security deposit only? And the answer is the tenant, if they make a security deposit, that security deposit must be held in accordance with the security deposit law in Massachusetts, which is very strict, and it must be a separate bank account per tenant. So the answer is that the tenant is entitled to the interest on that deposit on an annual basis. So it's not, you can't, if they live there for 5 years, the landlord can't, hold that interest over the 5-year term. They've got to remit it to the tenant every year. What would put you inactive? No continuing education or no renewal of your license? And the answer is, what is the answer? You can do your continuing education, but if you don't actually go to the state website, the e-portal thing that everybody hates, if you don't actually go there and do the renewal process and check the boxes and pay the fee, then you will not have renewed. Keep in mind that you should not renew until you actually have completed your 12 hours of continuing education, because one of the boxes that they require you to check is an affirmation, I think that's the right word, that you actually did your 12 hours of continuing education. And sadly, people lie about that. It comes around their birthday and they check the box, they haven't done it, and they're like, oh, no one's going to check. And then, all of a sudden, randomly, the Board of Registration calls upon them to check, or maybe they get involved with some type of consumer complaint, and they have to, almost the first thing the board does when you're involved with some type of consumer complaint is they're going to ask you, oh, while you're at it, can you send along your most recent continuing education certificate? And if yours is dated after your renewal date, then you're in double deep duty, right? So don't do that. Make sure you do your CE before you renew. And you have to both do the CE and actually process the payment at the e-portal. Otherwise, you'll be inactive. Can you review when we need to report to the board? I guess I already kind of answered that question, on your renewal date, I would say. Can you ask questions under the fair housing law? So, like about their, you can't ask questions about, what they do for, unless it's directly related to their ability to pay. Okay, so you can ask that question. If you want to know more about the Massachusetts Fair Housing Law, go over to gatelyacademy.com. Scroll down to where it says Massachusetts Lessons. There's a YouTube playlist there. It's 18 videos, and I believe I have a full-length video on Massachusetts Fair Housing. I believe it's the 16 video in that YouTube playlist, which is free on YouTube. You can find it on this channel, or you can go over at gatelyacademy.com and scroll down and find it there as well. Last question. Landlord increases the rent. The rent is 5 days late. Is this legal by the landlord? So you can only increase the rent if it's in the contract, right? So I have a lease here at this studio, and the rent goes up a certain percentage every year automatically because we have a written agreement for that. Now, the other opportunity or the other possibility would be if you're a tenant at will. If you're a tenant at will, you could have two ways a tenant at will could exist. It can exist in writing, but most tenancies at will exist verbally. And if you have a tenancy at will, the landlord could come around and say, okay, it's January 1st, first year, rent's going to go up $100. And if you don't like it, then you have options. The number one option is to move. And so sadly, but the tenancy at will, if you're looking for protections against potential future rate increases, then you should really get a lease. Strong believer in getting a lease. I think it protects the tenant and the landlord. If you don't want a lease, then my strong recommendation thereafter would be a written tenancy at will, and my last desirable or least desirable option would be a verbal tenancy at will. All right, so hey, you had questions, I had answers. I'm Jack Gately from Jack Gately Real Estate and the Online Real Estate Academy. Have a great day. Bye-bye.